Hey guys, Toby Mathis here, and today we're going to talk about how to invest through an LLC and when to use a land trust. So let's just start right from the top. If you're investing in real estate, then you need to ask yourself, what's the worst that could happen? So if I am let's say I'm a doctor in California and I realize that there's great property to be invested in Indianapolis, or I'm going to North Carolina, Winston-Salem, or Charlotte, or Kansas City, Missouri, or Idaho Falls. I'm going to one of these places where there's cash flow properties, and I invest. Let's just say it's $125,000 in a great little cash flow property. What's the worst thing that could happen to me? Okay, let's just say that your tenant invites somebody on their property and they step on a nail and they sue you for $2 million. And I'm giving you a real life case, by the way, where somebody came onto a property and they stepped on a nail, allegedly, and they sued the lights out of everybody. What you want to make sure of is that the worst thing that could happen is you lose that one property. What you don't want them to do is garnish your wages for the rest of your life and then attach your estate. Or you don't want them to take your investment accounts or your other properties. So we want to isolate that property, and that's what we use LLCs for. There's a ton of videos on my channel that goes over this, but what you need to know is that the most effective tool for real estate for minimizing exposure from what we call inside liability, which means the liability that's created from the real estate itself, is an LLC. It's probably the best tool. Now, every now and again, we use a slight variation like a Wyoming statutory trust if you're in California, or you might be using a land trust if you're in Florida, in conjunction most likely with an LLC anyway, but almost always there's going to be an LLC in the mix. It's like 99.9% of the time. You want to make sure that if something happens, it stops, so that if there's a property, here's your property, and here's you. If you don't have a division there, then anything that happens there is going to come over here. What we want to do is create a box around it so this does not happen. Instead, it bounces and stays, bound, 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 right? It stays inside that box. Same difference is you want to make it so that if something happens to you, they can't take your box away. That's what we spend a lot of time teaching here at Anderson, how you can get your name off of things, how you can make it to where even if they can see it, they can't take it from you by using states like Wyoming. But just at a base, you want to make sure that you're isolating that liability, which then says, how do I get that property in there? How do I do this? And I'll give it to you step by step, but I'm going to talk about the advantages of why you do that LLC in the first place. That LLC stands for Limited Liability Company. If somebody says Limited Liability Corporation, I'm going to make fun of you. No, it stands for LLC, just stands for Limited Liability Company. And the beautiful thing about LLCs is that not only are they a great asset protection tool, but for tax purposes, we can literally ignore them. So if you say, I heard that real estate has a bunch of tax benefits, I don't want to own it in an LLC because I'll lose those tax benefits. We can literally treat it as a disregarded entity with the federal government. Like we can say to the IRS, ignore it. Or if you have partners, treat it as a partnership, no different than if you were investing with them anyway. It's still going on your Schedule E. You're still having to do a partnership return. But LLCs can be taxed however you want. You want them to be taxed as a C Corp, you could do that. I wouldn't do that and hold investment property. But if you wanted to, you could. You could treat them as an S Corp. If you want to, you can. A lot of people do for their businesses. But for real estate, if you're buy and hold, you're going to have that as that LLC more than likely either as a disregarded entity, and it might be held by another LLC, or you're going to have it as a partnership, depending on your state and what your goals are. But that LLC gives you a high degree of asset protection. Now, I know you've probably been told, well, what about insurance? You still have insurance. You still want someone to fight that battle for you and cover that liability where it doesn't come out of your pocket. But it's certainly a better tool when you can make sure that you don't have unlimited liability that comes over to you. So you make sure that you have, if you're buying property, make sure you have a good landlord policy, and make sure that you have an umbrella policy, and make sure that you have it isolated in an LLC. And that's about as good as you're going to get. Like, yes, we could do some trusts and some things, some irrevocable trusts if you really wanted to take it to another level. But for 99% of you, You're just going to do that. Hey, let's make sure that that property is not in my name. Now, how do we do that? Big one. Oh, there's a couple more benefits I want to hit on real quick before we go into how to transfer the property. Something that people really don't give enough credence to is that LLC is perpetual. You set it up, it doesn't die. It's a great estate planning tool. So if you put an LLC in conjunction with like a living trust, you don't have to probate it. And if something happens to you, it's already to your heirs. As soon as you pass away, you don't have to go through a huge process. So much cleaner. And I wanted just to hit that because, oh my gosh, it's like people don't realize how torn up your estate could be if you own property. Let's say that I own property. I live in Nevada, Las Vegas. Let's say that I own property in Washington, Texas, and Nevada. And I own the property in my name because somebody told me just to get insurance. Your estate is going to be probating in Nevada, Washington, and in Texas. And it's going to take a long time for them to get through that. And it's going to be very costly when they have to show up and deal with these probates. And this is assuming there's not even a dispute, but this is absolutely a nightmare waiting to happen if you own a bunch of properties in a bunch of different states. You can avoid that simply by having LLCs so that the decedent's estate is where they pass away, and the property that they own is actually the membership interest in the LLC, not the real estate, so that you don't have to probate in all 3 jurisdictions if you own property in 3 states. That's a huge one. I just want to emphasize that. Last thing, and then we'll go into how you actually get the property in there, is when you do have an LLC, you do qualify for different types of financing. There's DSCR loans, which is basically a loan based off of the revenue, the cash flow of that piece of real estate. And so if you want that loan, more than likely they're going to want to isolate it from all your other real estate. It used to be that commercial loans, for example, you could get them and they'd give them to your individual name. Now the banks want you in an LLC. They'll oftentimes create 2. They don't even just want the property to be in an LLC. They want to secure their loan with the ownership of that LLC through a second LLC so that they don't have to foreclose on the real estate. They could just take the interest, which means you have a whole different world of lender available to you when you set those up. Okay, enough of that. You guys should know that the entity of choice, if you are going to be investing and you want asset protection, is going to be that LLC. Now, how do we set it up? How do we do it? So the first thing we do is we're going to set it up with the state. So you're going to form LLC with the state. Generally, it's going to be the state where the property is held. A lot of times you hear about Wyoming and Nevada, why we use those. Those are holding entities. The property that owns the real estate is almost always going to be in the state where that property is. If you're in like a state like Texas where you have series LLCs, you have multiple properties, you could do one series and have it own a whole bunch of properties. You're probably going to have those series, though, owned by another LLC out of state, so you can have a higher degree of anonymity and a higher degree of protection. But that's a topic for a different video. But this is how we do it. We form the LLC with the state. So let's say that I'm in Indianapolis. So I'm going to set up an Indiana LLC to hold that property. I'm going to set it up ahead of time before I buy. I'm going to do the articles of organization with the state. I'm going to get an EIN with the IRS. That stands for Employer Identification Number. I'm going to tell them how I want it to be treated. Do I want it to be ignored for tax purposes? Do I want it to be a partnership? It depends on what you're doing. You know, if you want to make sure that you're doing this right, then just type, here's an easy one, type in strategy session. Just hit strategy down below in the comments, and we'll send you a link so you can do a strategy session and talk to somebody so they can tell you, do a blueprint. We'll do a free blueprint for you. How about that? So that if you want to know what it would look like for your type of investing, you could see what a structure might look like. But we're going to set up that EIN depending on the best thing for you and how you want it treated. Let's say that we just set it up as disregarded, so it's ignored for tax purposes. Everything flows onto my 1040 on my page 1 of my Schedule E, just like I owned it in my name. You could do that. So I set up that EIN, get that puppy set up. Then I'm going to set up my bank account. Here's a fun one. Do you know that an LLC can be owned by your IRA or your 401k if you want to invest in real estate? It's called a checkbook IRA. What you could do is make sure that you're like, hey, I don't have enough cash in my own personal name, but I still want to invest in real estate. How do I do it? A lot of times you set up a self-directed IRA, move your funds into it, and then set up an LLC that's owned, because you want to make sure you have asset protection. Even though it's in an IRA, it provides no asset protection, so it could still be personal responsibility. So we set up an LLC owned by the IRA, ignored, and voila, you now have asset protection in an IRA. You can invest in your 401k, IRA, whatever. You could do the same thing. But we set up a bank account in it so it can buy the property. You want to make sure that it could actually do this. And then you use that to cover the rental expenses, anything associated with that property, maybe mortgage payments if you're doing a DSCR loan or any sort of loan, but you're covering the property taxes, all that in there. And then, most important thing, you ready? You buy it in LLC name. This is a big one, right? It doesn't help you to set up an LLC and buy the property in your name. Don't do that, right? It needs to be in the name. It needs to be titled in the name of the LLC. So you want to set this up beforehand. When you sign a contract, when you make an offer on a property, it should be in the name of the LLC. If you don't have the LLC set up first and you're playing a little bit of catch up, then you put, like, it might be Toby Mathis or an entity to be assigned later. So, or I just put Toby Mathis and or assigns. So some people don't like that because they know that wholesalers use that language. But I would just say, hey, I want it to be me or an entity, or I'm going to use a land trust. And I'll go over when to use the land trust here in a second. I might just do that because it's fast and easy, and I could create those in my sleep really quickly without having to worry about filing anything with the state. I just know that I do not want it in my name. So I do this, I set that puppy up, I form it with the state, I get a tax identification number, I get a bank account open, and I buy it in the name. All right, now let's talk about when we are going to add a land trust to this mix. And what is a land trust? A land trust, for our purposes, is a privacy tool. The reason that we like to use land trusts, there's really two big reasons. Number one, to create anonymity of ownership so somebody can't see that me as Toby Mathis own it, because I may have to disclose that depending on how I set up my LLC. And if it's in my LLC and they see Toby Mathis as its manager or member, then, like, if I have 10 of those, I'm asking for trouble. If I set up an anonymity program, so let's say I use a Wyoming LLC, it will look like this. I have a Wyoming LLC, and it owns this one, owns another one, owns another one. My name's nowhere in that record. Like, I could actually own this, let's see if I can get out of the way, to where nobody can even see that I own that interest in those LLCs, because the Wyoming is anonymity, has anonymity. But let's say that I have a bunch of properties. Let's say that I have a whole bunch of properties and I have one LLC. Like, if you get up to where you have like 20 or 30 properties, you don't want to have an LLC per property. If you have 3 properties, you want an LLC per property. Losing one of those would really hurt. Losing 2 of them would be catastrophic, and losing all 3, they're all in the same LLC. So if something bad happens here, they take these other 2. We want to make sure that doesn't happen. We want to make it to where if something happens on one, it stays there. So I would be doing this structure if you had 3 properties. But if you have 30 properties, we might do 10 of 3, right? 3 apiece. But now if I have them titled, let's say it's an ABC LLC, something happens here, they already can see, oh wait, this LLC has other properties. Deep pockets. You're inviting an action against you. I hate to say it because you like to pretend that the law is blind, right? Doesn't work that way. So what you might want to do is create a land trust for each one of these for title purposes. And a land trust is a fancy way of saying, I created a contract between myself as the grantor, myself as the trustee, myself as the beneficiary. And the trustee, I could hire a lawyer to stand in there, or I could use an anonymity. I could use an anonymous LLC. There we go. So that my name's not even on the property. I can do that with a land trust. People are like, you can't do that. You can do it in all 50 states, guys. A land trust is a grantor trust, just like a living trust. No different. It's set up to hold title to real estate. The rights to occupy, the rights to the rents are held by the beneficiary. Now, why would I use the land trust? Because in this situation, I could have green trust, red trust, blue trust, or whatever I want to call it. I could call it, Roger, Paul, Philip, LLC, whatever. I could name it off of the address, 123 Main Street, 456 South Street, 789 North Street, right? Trust. It would be like 123 Main Street Trust by its trustee, and then I use either an attorney or I use an anonymous LLC to be the trustee. So it might be 123 Main Street Trust by its trustee, 123 LLC. That's it. My name's nowhere on there. But what's more important is that they cannot see that ABC LLC owns all three of those properties. Now, I could have multiple properties where somebody cannot see who owns them ultimately. It's called an anonymity shield. Probably the most effective thing we do in asset protection. I wish I could say, oh, it's the LLCs we draft. We have great operating agreements. We've been to battle so many times. We know what they should have in there. Ours are very thick because we put in so many extra provisions. We have a whole bunch of different language because of what we've learned over the 25 years of doing battle with these things, that we know what it should have. So our agreements are great. But you know what's the best tool? Not getting sued. Not having somebody come in and attack you, not having somebody come in and be able to go after you. So from a privacy standpoint, those land trusts, wow, they're great. Now there's another reason we use them. Because the banks, when they see trust, they think Garn-St. Germain Act. And what does that mean? It means they cannot call a due on sale clause when it's a grantor trust and it's a residential property, 4 or fewer units, and you're residing there. So you're saying, but I'm not residing there. I'm just going to say that's what the Garn-St. Germain Act states. In practice, when they see trust, they don't know. They're not going to ask you, hey, do you live there? Maybe we'll call it. They see trust and they go, oh, we're used to everybody that has a living trust transfers it back in their living trust. They don't care. 25 years, 27 years of doing this, 28 years, excuse me, jeez, it's been a minute. 28 years of doing this, I've never seen a due on sale clause triggered by a land trust, period. I've seen them triggered from LLCs, never seen them, and that's very few. Usually once they understand that it's still you, they don't care. But the only few times I've ever seen it was the LLC, never with the land trust. Now our firm seen a couple, but it's always just a conversation. And once they see you're the beneficiary at the bank, they're like, oh, they just want to make sure that you're not disguising a transfer of ownership. So once they know it's you, you're fine. Your state's no different. You're not going to see a reassessment on the land trust. Some states, on that LLC, you got to be careful. Like Florida is a little bit of a sticky wicket. The other thing is the land trust in some states, Florida again, is a great example, does have asset protection just by itself. So you could actually use a land trust the same way you could use an LLC, but you get the anonymity. You see what I'm saying here? Is that you could actually keep your name off your real estate, period. Do you know you can use a version of a land trust even on your home? It's called a personal residence privacy trust, so that you don't have your name on your house. And somebody says, why would I want that? So if, depending on what profession you're in, if somebody looks you up and starts showing up, or if you have a bunch of tenants, the last thing you want is somebody showing up on your house saying, hey, my toilet's been leaking. Or some cases, I have a friend of mine who's a psychiatrist and dealt with some pretty disturbed folks. You don't want them looking you up and showing up on your doorstep. I have friends that were in law enforcement where their names were automatically gone. They retire. I want to make sure that they keep anonymity. Now, some states have protections. Some states, you just want to make sure on investment properties and things like that, do not have your name associated with it, or somebody that you don't want coming up and showing up on your doorstep might show up on your doorstep. Anonymity is huge when it comes to asset protection. At a minimum, though, we could do this and buy our properties, even without having, like, you could still do anonymity with that LLC and either using a Wyoming LLC to hold it or using a land trust. And a lot of times we see our clients using them together. The land trust plus an LLC is a tremendous, powerful tool. And I know what you're thinking. You're just saying that because every year you're going to charge me something for the land trust and it has to do a tax return, doesn't it? No. Land trusts have no filing fees. They have nothing you're paying for on an annual basis. It does not have a tax return. It's a grantor trust. So that tax return is going to be like, if I have a disregarded LLC and I have the property in a land trust, I have zero tax returns, just my personal return. But that's an LLC and a land trust and you. Correct. But from the IRS standpoint, they ignore the whole thing. So we get all the benefits of owning the real estate. We have our name off the property. We still have good insurance. We still have an umbrella policy. And we've limited our exposure to just that one property. And we can do that. Just keep repeating it. So if you have 100 properties, it's easy to create 100 land trusts. Make sure that they're not in your name. If you have multiple properties pointed to an LLC, nobody can see that. You know that. Your advisor might know that, but no tenant knows that. So you're not going to get aggressive tenants, unscrupulous lawyers, the hammer or whatever the heck he's got on a billboard. He's going to go after all those landlords or whoever the soup du jour is in your state. God knows we have them on billboards all over the place where I live. You don't have those folks saying, I'm going to shake this guy down because he has money, or I'm going to shake this gal down because she has money. You're going to make it to where they can't see, so they don't know. So you're not inviting that into your house. So there you go. Now you know. You're going to say, well, what if I own the property in my name? How do I get in here? What if I have property with debt on it? I'm using a land trust. 9 times out of 10, I'm using a land trust. If I can buy a property and I can get financing in an LLC, then I'm just going to buy it through that LLC, and I'm going to do one property for LLC. If I'm going to have multiple properties for LLC, I'm probably using land trust so that nobody can see that I have 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 properties in a single LLC. I don't want them to know that. I want them to think each property is a separate entity and that's the extent of the exposure, and leave it at that. And by the way, these tools are built to work under stressful circumstances. If you find yourself in a lawsuit, you're going to be glad that that property is not in your name, that it was already transferred. All this was done ahead of time so that you could sleep at night and you can, if you do have a loss and it's a catastrophic loss, you can minimize it and move on. If you're getting frivolous lawsuit, you can prevent it, minimize it, keep it from happening so that you don't get that nasty joy of, having 2 years of your life sucked into a legal action. You're not missing anything, guys. If you never get sued, you didn't miss out. If you never go inside a courtroom, you didn't miss out. There wasn't anything exciting going on in there except some lawyers getting paid and a judge exercising discretion over the courthouse. You didn't miss anything. It's never good for you and me to go in there. We just want to avoid it. And that's what the land trust and the LLC does. Hey, again, right strategy session if you want to talk to somebody about what a blueprint might look for you. And please like and subscribe, and I'll see you later.